It's live. It's on the air right now. The D-Toxd Digest podcast. The podcast that'll give you insights into life so that you can make every moment matter. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hey, and welcome to today's episode of the D-Toxd Digest podcast. Our podcast where we give you insights into life so you can make every moment matter. We're on episode 6 today. That means that I can start counting on 2 hands. And this episode is dealing with cravings. So I hope that you find it helpful and enjoy it. I just want to make sure that everything is set up right because I'm also recording this for the podcast. So I have my microphone plugged in here and it's recording on my computer apparently, but who knows? You never know. I'm going to get this started. If you haven't joined us before for one of our live episodes of the D-Toxd Digest, my name is Gareth. And I am one half of D-Toxd, a health retreat out here in Spain where we help people do all things healthy living. And we've put together our weekly live streams to give people an insight into how we approach health and the things that we do, some of the stuff that we help people with at our retreat. And they are proving to be pretty popular. So I'm really, really glad that you can join us. And I really, really hope that you get a lot out of this episode. If you were with us last week, we talked about sugar. And more importantly, we spoke about this diagram here, which is how we eat. We have the physical way that we eat, we have the emotional way, and we have the mental way. And, or when I say mental, it's not like, it's kind of like the way that we think about how we eat. So what I want to go into tonight, because a lot of people last week were struggling with sugar and dealing with stopping it and all that sort of stuff. And one of the things that happens when we try to stop eating a certain food or stop doing something is that after we cut it out of our diet and our lifestyle, we start to have cravings. And cravings is often one of the things where people struggle, especially when it comes to creating new strategies moving forward. They want to know, well, how do I deal with the cravings and all that sort of stuff? Now, before I go into kind of like the content that I have put together for you, I'd just like to give you a little bit of insight into why I am so passionate about this, because this is one of the topics that I am extremely passionate about. I am a recovering addict and alcoholic. My life used to be driven by drugs and drinking, and it got me into a real mess. As a result of that, I also used to physically hurt myself, so I'm a recovering self-harmer too. So when it came to making changes, I had to make some pretty big changes in my life. And if you've ever read our book, Inside Out, you will know that some of the stuff is spoken about in there. And one of the hardest things that I found to overcome was dealing with the cravings that happened as a result of me stopping that thing, as a result of me stopping doing drugs. At the end of my, I don't know, for want of a better word, at the end of my drug career, I was taking loads and loads of painkillers every day, and I was drinking a lot every day. And I knew that something had to change. Now, I know that drugs are, out there as something that are bad for you and all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to eating as well, there are certain things that we get addicted to, whether we realize it or not. And then we get to a certain point in our lives where maybe our weight is more than we had hoped it would be, or maybe our health is struggling. We're having problems with our digestive system. We're having problems with our energy levels. We're having aches and pains in our body, and we get to that point where we say, okay, well, maybe I am having too much, whatever it is. And what we then need to start to address is what's going on behind those addictions that we might have. So I'm going to go into addictions and dealing with the cravings on all three levels, like we did before, like we spoke about last week when we said, how do we eat sugar? We eat it physically, we eat it emotionally, and we eat it mentally. A lot of times people struggle to change a habit because they only deal with it physically, because they only say to myself, oh, I'm going to stop eating sugar. And it's the physical act of it that they stop doing. So they stop eating sugar. And as a result, they start to get physical withdrawals. And because of those physical withdrawals, they go through a period of craving where they say, oh, I've got to have it, I've got to have it. And then they have a relapse, for want of a better word. And physically, they go back to the whatever it is that they're eating. We're going to use sugar in the context of this. We're going to use chocolate. We're going to use sugary goods, whatever it is. There might be something else that you are struggling with if you're watching this, so you can just insert it there. But a lot of times we physically stop it. Now, what we need to start to realize is that a craving is a powerful desire for something. I'm sure that we've all had them. I'm sure that we've all got to those points where we've had that really burning, driving desire to have something that we've stopped doing. And I can relate a lot to that because in the past, I did some pretty stupid things. Like I would wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning after having made a decision to stop drinking and having made a decision to start doing drugs. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, I would get in my car and drive to somewhere that was open just so I could get that thing to satiate my craving. And when we start to realize that what we are ingesting physically is required by the brain to create things for memory, to create things for pleasure, to create things for reward, we start to realize that what we are doing is we are associating whatever it is that we are craving with memory, pleasure, and reward. So now what we're starting to do, what we're starting to understand, is we're seeing that we're creating an emotional attachment to that thing. So all of a sudden, I've removed this thing that I am eating, I've removed the sugar from my life, but I haven't dealt with it emotionally. So when I start to realize that there are some emotional attachments to these things, I can start to change them moving forward. Now, what we also need to realize about cravings is that there are a number of things that come into cravings. Number one, we can have physical imbalances. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail tonight because I forgot to bring my Power Pack book. And in the Power Pack book, which is a book that we've written at the retreat, we have a section on there that deals with cravings and imbalances on a physical level. So I'm going to do another episode where I run through those things on a physical level. There could be things, there could be deficiencies in our system that are causing us to crave that certain thing. But what we want to start doing is kind of like looking at some ways that we can start to change those habits and deal with those cravings. Does that make sense so far? I hope that it does. I've got my fidget spinner here, in case I get nervous. Who remembers these? I still use mine very, very regularly. So we're going to go through this. I've put down here 5 steps, and I want to run through 5 steps that will help you to deal with cravings, that will help you to understand cravings. The first step, and if you joined us on last week's episode, we spoke about keeping a food diary and the what and the how and the why we are eating. But the first step is to identify, and I'm sure we all know this, to identify what our physical craving is. So if you have a pen and paper with you, write down what your physical craving is. If you're keeping notes in your mind, make a note in your mind what your physical craving is. I'm going to use one that I've stopped, because there are things that I've also struggled with when it comes to eating and that sort of stuff. And one of my ones was chocolate bars. I used to love chocolate bars. I used to eat 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 loads of chocolate bars every single day. So I have identified my physical craving. Step number 2 that I want to start going into is, what is the thought process that you go through when you think about having that thing? Think about the things that you think of. These are the things that you mentally run through your head. So I'm going to take it back to my one. Now, the first one is, I've got to have a chocolate bar. I start thinking, I've got to have a chocolate bar. I've got to have a chocolate bar. The second one that I think of is, it's going to taste good. It's going to taste good. The third one that I start to think about is, it's going to give me energy. It's going to give me energy. It's going to make me feel better. It's going to give me an immediate quick fix. So you see now what we're starting to do is we're starting to address where our mental focus is going when we think about that chocolate bar. So we've got step 1, where we've identified our physical craving. Step 2, we've identified the thought process that we're going through. Now we're going to take it to another level. We're going to address step 3, and step 3 is to address the emotional state that I'm in. Because now what I want to start doing is I want to start understanding on all 3 of these levels, physically, mentally, and emotionally, what that chocolate bar means to me. Does that make sense? I hope that it does. I want to identify what that chocolate bar means to me. So when I start to address my emotional state, I can start to identify what I am associating with that chocolate bar. So I might be tired. That might be my emotional state of being. I might be stressed. I might be angry. I might be sad. Whatever it is, we're going to all have our own emotional states that we are associating with having that thing. Now, when I think of that thing on all 3 levels, whether I realize it or not, that is what is going to start to create my physical craving. It's going to start to create that thing that I have to have that, I have to have that, I have to have that. Because I'm addressing my needs on a physical level, I'm addressing my needs on a mental level, and I'm addressing my needs on an emotional level. I can then start to undo the patterns or understand the patterns that I'm going to put into it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start doing some forward movement with this. And the 4th step is, what I want to do is I want to interrupt the pattern. When I start to take notice of my physical state, my mental state, and my emotional state around those sort of things, I can then do something that brings me back into the moment, that brings me back into the now. And a lot of times I need to interrupt my pattern. Some of you may have met me in person and you'll notice that I'm always wearing one of these. I wear it because it's pretty important to me from what it says on it, so it's a pay it forward bracelet. But the other reason that I wear it is that it's also elasticated. And what I can do when I start to realize that I'm getting a craving that is becoming obsessive thinking, I can use it to snap myself back into reality. What I am then doing is I'm interrupting my state, and I'm interrupting my pattern, and I'm bringing myself back into the now. Because in the now is the only moment that I can make a choice. In the now is the only moment that I can do something differently. So when I bring myself back into the moment, it helps me to say, okay, I was about to make a choice that I didn't want to make. Another one that I can do is to clap my hands loudly. Again, it just snaps me into the present moment. It just brings me back into the now. And when I am in the now, I can change my state. when I change my physiological state, which is the state that I hold myself in physically, I'm better equipped to make better decisions. When I am in a physiological state where my emotions are running wild, and where my thoughts are running wild, it's a lot easier to make old decisions. So if I'm feeling stressed and I'm holding my body in a stressed way, the only thing that I'm emotionally attached to right then and there is to have something that's going to take me out of that emotional state. If I bring myself back into the moment, I can change my physiological state. Now, there are many, many different schools of thought. The one that I like to follow and the one that I feel works best for me is that I have roughly 5 minutes to create a strategy. I have roughly 5 minutes to create a strategy when I am in a physical, mental, and emotional state. I can go through it. Now, think about this. How many decisions does it take me to have something that I don't have right now? I've got to get up from where I am. I've got to walk to the kitchen. I've got to open the cupboard. I've got to see if I have a chocolate bar. If I have a chocolate bar, then I've got to reach in. I've got to take it out. I've got to open it up. And then I've got to take a bite. But if I bring myself into the present moment, it only takes me one decision to say, I'm not going to have that. Now, when I make that decision that says I'm not going to have that, guess where it's going to affect me? On all 3 levels. It's going to affect me physically, it's going to affect me emotionally, and it's going to affect me mentally. Think about it like this. If a little kid comes to you and says, I want XYZ, and you say no, what's the first thing that they're going to do? And I'm sure we've all had experience of little kids. The first thing that they're going to do is they're going to push back. They're going to say, no, I want that. And then it's going to come back to me, and I'm going to say no. So we are having this constant battle. So we want to take it now to the next step, and step 5 of all of this is to start creating new options and new strategies. So when the kid comes to me and the kid asks me, or the baby asks me, or the child asks me for XYZ, and I say no, and then they kick back, what happens when I say to them, how about you try this? The first thing that they're going to do potentially is kick back again. But what you have actually done is you've actually planted a new seed on the physical and mental levels. So they're now going to start engaging with the new option differently. They're now going to start playing it through. They're now going to start running the process through. Oh, I've been offered ABC instead of XYZ. And whether we realize it or not, internally, we're going to make a physical association to that. And that physical association is going to change us on an emotional level. So we need to start looking around and start to create more options for ourselves. And in doing that, we start to create different strategies, because we're all going to have strategies for how we carry out our addictions. We're all going to have strategies for how we do whatever it is that we are repeatedly doing that we no longer want to do. And those strategies become hardwired in the brain. We have buying strategies, we have dressing strategies, we have all sorts of strategies, but we also have addiction strategies. And the strategy is the way that you do something. The strategy is the way that you carry something through. So I remember in my drinking days, I used to leave work at 5 o'clock, and I would drive home a certain way, and I would stop at the shops and I would buy myself some booze, and I would go home and I would sit down and start drinking. And then I would wait for the kids to go to bed, and then I would finish drinking until I was tit-faced and passed out, because that was the only way that I could sleep. So when I started to realize that I needed to make changes, I needed to change my strategy, and I needed to give myself new options. The most obvious option was to drive home a different way. The most obvious option was to do something during that witching hour. So when I first stopped my drinking and my drugs, what I would do at 5 o'clock is I would leave home, and at 5:30 there would be a 12-step meeting, and I would go to the 12-step meeting. And what that would do was, for an hour, it would take my mind off my old habits. And it started to hardwire a new strategy into my being. So your strategy may be to buy a certain amount of chocolates every week, and you leave that until the end of your shopping, or that sort of stuff, or to wake up in the morning and go to the kitchen and turn the kettle on and make yourself a cup of very strong coffee, or get home at the end of the day, put your bag on the table, go and sit down on the couch and open up a bar of chocolate. Whatever it is, you're going to have a strategy that you repeatedly do. I remember speaking to one lady at the retreat not so long ago, and her strategy was every lunchtime she would go down to the vending machine and she would put her money in the vending machine and she would get her chocolate out. And that was her strategy. One day she went down to the vending machine and the vending machine was not working, and she freaked out because she had to do something differently. And it was in that moment that she realized that potentially there might have been a problem. So when we start to look at our strategies, we can start to say, okay, maybe this is where I can start making some changes. Maybe this is where I can start giving myself some new options. And I'm going to put across a very, very important point right now, because for me, and from what I see from people that I work with, is that it's often the first time that is the most difficult time. It's the first time of doing something differently that is the most difficult one. I'm just going to get a drink of water. Please tell me that this is making sense, because I'm just waffling on. I'm really passionate about this one. Spilled water everywhere. Does that make sense? Please. I feel like a normal no-mate sitting here talking into the phone and speaking on the microphone and recording things, but it doesn't matter. So I'm going to run through the 5 steps quickly. The first one is to identify the physical craving. The second one is to identify the thought process that you're going through. The third one is to address the emotional state that you're in. The fourth one, bam, is to change the pattern and interrupt the pattern. Now, I'll just add something with this one. This is a pretty cool one. Like, one of my problems in the past was self-harming. And what I realized was that it wasn't the self-harming that I was addicted to. It was the endorphins that the body creates as a result of being in pain that I was addicted to. When I start to realize that even though this is not a lot of pain, it is creating endorphins in my body, it takes me out of that state. And then the fifth one is to start to create new options and new strategies for our actions. So I'm going to run through now a few points that you can start to implement that will help you to deal with any potential cravings that you are having right now. The first one, and it might sound pretty obvious, but I think it's really, really important, is that we need to start tracking our stress levels. So if you've been creating or if you've been putting together or keeping a food diary like we spoke about last week, you might have started to uncover certain situations that are getting you to turn to food or that sort of stuff. When we start to track our stress levels, we can then start to look at the things that are leading us to eat emotionally, because stress is an emotional state of being. And a lot of times, stress is very real. Don't get me wrong. I'm not downplaying stress here at all. We have a lot of stress going on around us right now. So being stressed is that sort of thing. But a lot of times, stress can lead us to doing emotional things because we want to negate the cortisol. We want to negate all the hormones in the body that are creating stress. And a lot of times, it's also my perception of stress that is creating my association with it. So when I start to track my stress levels, what I can then start to do is look at my stress responses, and I can start to implement new responses. Another one that I'm going to introduce you to, I'm just going to write it down here quickly first. And this one I learned from the 12-step program. And this is, I know it's going to be backward, and that's meant to be an A. So it is the Hult process. When I have a craving, or when I want to deal with stress on a certain level, I'm usually doing it for 4 main reasons. The first one is because I'm hungry. So that is the H. The second one is because I'm angry. The third one is because I'm lonely. And the fourth one is because I'm tired. Those 4 situations are the main triggers that lead to cravings. Those 4 situations are the main triggers that lead to me indulging in something that I don't want to. So I need to look at them. I need to say to myself when I have a craving, am I hungry? A lot of times when I'm hungry, my body is probably dehydrated. So it's really, really important to keep yourself hydrated, because when my body is hydrated, it's not going to crave the things that it usually does. When it is hunger, I can then say to myself, well, am I really hungry, or am I eating for an emotional need? Now, an emotional need doesn't only have to be negative. And that's an important thing to think about. An emotional need doesn't have to be negative, because sometimes we will reward ourselves with things. It's like, oh, do you know what? I did really, really well today, so I deserve that treat. I did really, really well today, so I deserve to have X, Y, Z. And then, because I'm not really hungry, I then start to do that thing. I can look at the A and I can say to myself, well, I'm angry. What am I angry about? What are the things that are leading to my anger? What are the things that are creating my anger? Now, it doesn't have to be a big angry. It can be a little angry, like frustration or confusion or overwhelm. Those are all just other littler words for anger. So when I say to myself, you know, am I angry? I can deal with that anger, and then I can say to myself afterwards, well, do I really need to have that chocolate bar? Do I really need to turn to that? Sometimes, like the L says, is loneliness. Loneliness happens when we are feeling isolated. And sometimes we put walls up internally that isolate us from the people around us. So we may have people around us, but we feel completely alone because we've isolated ourselves in our emotions. Now, if you can imagine that I'm sitting here and I've got this wall all around me, all I'm doing is swimming in all those emotions. All I'm doing is swimming in all those thoughts, and it can often overwhelm me. And because I can't see past the walls, or I can't see through the walls, I feel like I'm drowning in emotion, and I make myself very, very lonely. And then do you know what? This chocolate bar or this whatever it is becomes my comfort. When I realize that I'm feeling lonely, I can then reach out. I can then pick up the phone and phone somebody, or I can then start to talk to somebody, or whatever that is. That takes away the loneliness. And the T, which is pretty straightforward, is tired. Maybe you need to get a little bit of rest. Maybe you need to take a break. Sometimes I'll be sitting at work and I'll be in the kitchen and I'll be chopping things, and I'll think, oh, do you know what I could do with now? I could really do with a chocolate. And there were times, at the retreat because we're human, and we also have these things where we had bags of sweets in the cupboard because sometimes, like I would say, today is sponsored by sugar, and I just had to get through it. But what I've realized is that that's not a very positive thing to do. It's not going to leave me feeling very healthy. So now what I will do when I'm in a situation like that is I'll put my knife down and I'll take a walk out of the kitchen and I'll go and walk around the block and I'll go and get some fresh air, or I'll go and spend time with some of the guests, or whatever it is. What it does is it breaks my state. It gets me to breathe differently, and it gets me to give myself energy in another way. So that's the Hult method. We've already discussed the changing your strategy. So that's another one that we can start to reduce our cravings, is to kind of like change your strategy, change your route home, change what you do when you get home. Maybe instead of getting home and putting your bag on the table and then going and sitting down, put your bag on the table and start making yourself something to eat straight away. Often an interruption to that strategy in that way makes a very big difference. One of the big ones is plan your eating. It's really, really important to eat regularly and to eat balanced. And that does take a little bit of planning. But sometimes, because we are human, we don't like to plan. We think that it's boring. We think that it takes too much time. I'd rather sit down at the end of the day and eat my chocolate bar. So when I start to put in a little bit of planning, then it is a lot easier to make sure that I have different things around the house. One of the big deficiencies in the body when you crave chocolate, one of the big deficiencies is magnesium. If I have things in the house, let me just look and see if I can find this here. No, I can't. I don't want to do anything on my computer in case it freezes anything. But when I start to look at things that contain magnesium, nuts are a great source of magnesium, and they can often deal with cravings and that sort of stuff. When I start to put a little bit of planning in, then it can make a big difference. So those are some of the ways that you can start to reduce your cravings. Does anyone have any questions? Because I think that I have covered everything that I wanted to cover for you. There'll be two things about me that you don't know. I don't like starting things, and I find it difficult to end things. So I'm going to issue you with a challenge from today. For the next week, we're going to work on those 5 steps, and I'll type them up in a post on the Facebook page. The first one is to identify your physical craving. The second one is to look at the thought process that you go through when you think about it. The third one is to address your emotional state. The fourth one is to interrupt your pattern and change your state. And the fifth one is to start to brainstorm some new options and strategies that you can have moving forward. Thank you, Karen. Oh, I get so excited at the end of these. I'm just going to hang around for a few more questions. If you found this useful, please make sure you share it, because that would be really, really nice. I want to show you my spinner. But my spinner is one of the things. This is one of my strategies. Sometimes when I get a little bit edgy and I want to do certain things, I will pick up my spinner and I will play with it. It even has, oh, the batteries are going, yeah. Look at this. It's even got lights on it. So I'll switch the lights off and I will just watch the lights. Because like I was saying earlier on, it takes roughly 5 minutes to create a strategy for you to do something. So you'll start having a thought process, and then you'll start thinking those thoughts through, and then you'll start in your mind creating a plan to do them, and then that's when you go and do them. So if you can just sit tight for 3 to 5 minutes, there is the potential that you can deal with that craving. But like I said near the beginning, the first time is always going to be the most difficult time, because sometimes it can be overwhelming. And I get that. Like, I struggled at first to create new strategies and to create new options. And there were times in the past where I just sat and rocked and said to myself, I've just got to get through the next 10 seconds. I've just got to get through the next 10 seconds. Now, I'm not saying that what you're going through is as bad as that, because that's the reason why I share so openly, because I don't want people to reach that point where their whole life is consumed by something. But I'm only saying that because I can relate to it. You know, like I was saying, I would just sit there and rock. I would just sit there and say to myself, I've got to get through this. I've got to get through this. I've got to get through this. But then, once I got through it the first time, then I was like, wow, I actually did it. I actually did it. And it made it a lot easier to go through it the next time. It made it a lot easier to change it moving forward the next time. So I hope that you found that helpful. I need to figure out why. Okay, Marie, I'm going to do a whole other episode on that one day. Someone's just asked a question. I need to figure out why I self-sabotage. So an important thing for you would be to create a record of your thoughts that go through your mind when you are having those cravings and that sort of stuff. How do I read comments on here? My strategy. I'm going to read it on my computer. My strategy is to delay and tell myself, if you still want one in half an hour, have one. I also have to check in with Mrs. Hardy every night to report on what I'm eating. That is a very, very good one, because I'm just waiting for the question. Okay, there it is. What I used to say to myself, like when I used to get home at the end of the day, I used to say to myself, oh, I really need a drink. And then what I started doing, because I was tracking my thought process, I would say to myself, well, do I want to drink because I want to deal with something? Or do I want to drink because I want to drink? 9 times out of 10, the answer was I want to drink because I wanted to deal with something. If that was the answer, then I would go away and deal with that thing. I would go away and say, okay, why do I feel I need to reward myself? Why do I feel I need to switch off? Why do I feel I need to take time out, whatever it is? And then what I would do is I would address those situations. I would address those things on an individual level. And then after a period of time, I would come back to myself and I would say, okay, do I still want to drink? And if the answer was yes, it would be like, okay, have I dealt with the thing or do I want to drink? Sometimes it would be, I just want to drink. And then I would say to myself, well, I don't have to have a drink of XYZ. I can have a drink of something else. And accountability is a really, really important one. Making yourself accountable, getting a buddy, keeping a food diary and giving it to someone makes it a lot easier to stay on track, makes it a lot easier to deal with things. So for me, my AA and my NA meetings were my accountability. I knew that I needed to be at that meeting and I needed to be clean and sober in some sort of way. In the 12-step programs, they say to yourself, get a sponsor. And your sponsor is someone that you would make yourself accountable to. But the important thing with these kind of things is if you have a buddy and if you are making yourself accountable, I'm going to add that because that's a good one. Ways to reduce your cravings is get a buddy. I'm just writing that down. Thanks, Helen, for adding that one. Because what is then important to do is to phone your buddy or your accountability partner before. Because before you do something, I can potentially talk you out of it. Or before you do something, I can potentially help you deal with whatever is going on. Afterwards, I can't. I can help you deal with the fallout and the consequences of that, especially the emotional consequences, but you're going to have to go through it physically. But when I make myself accountable to someone, I'm going to make it more likely that I deal with things. So that is a really, really good one. I'm going to add that one in and I'm going to attribute it to you, Helen. Any other ones? Any other questions? And if you want to, you can always send me your food diaries and I can help you to look at them and to figure them out. You can always send me your thought processes, your stresses, and that sort of stuff. I'm currently working on putting together a 6-week program that will help people to deal with these kind of things and to start to understand and identify what's going on behind the scenes. If you've listened to this podcast and you'd like to join our private support group on Facebook, then just search for the D-Toxd Digest support group and request to join, and you'll be able to ask questions, make yourself accountable, get support. We'll be doing some extra Q&A sessions in there because let's face it, when it comes to healthy living, there's so much stuff out there. It's really easy to get overwhelmed and confused by everything. So we've put together a support group so that you can start making those changes. Thanks for listening to this episode, and we hope to see you soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.